Buddy, I am back tonight, just myself, doing episode number 159 of the Club and Sub podcast. Tonight, I'm going to be briefly discussing this weekend's UFC Austin card. Pretty good card, a lot of good fights to like. From a betting perspective, I don't think it's the best card we've ever seen in the world. It's pretty tricky on paper, but I mean, some interesting stuff to discuss. I'm excited to get into it. Before I do, guys, if you like the show, drop a like and subscribe. It would really help us out. And yeah, I mean, without further ado, I'll briefly go over, last card's results. Weren't great. It was minus 4.9 units for me. I had the over in Moda and Ogden for a unit, which cash, that was nice. I had a heavy play on Charles Johnson, had 4 units on him at about plus 132. Um, new Charles fighting unintelligent was a pretty live outcome. I don't. It's really hard to even post that fight, just because I mean the cardio dynamic was predictable. Charles outlanded him in significant strikes, like 90-14, something crazy like that. I think he wins round three at a huge clip. It just really comes down to how often he's going to fight smart in the early going in that fight. Sadly, he didn't, so that was an L. And then I had 1.9 units on Jonathan Pierce at minus 130, and yeah, I'm a bit surprised he got subbed. I thought he could do a better job fighting out of that. Broadly speaking, though, I think I'd bet it again. I mean, he was winning pretty minute dominant, even in round one, which he lost on 2 cards. I mean, he outlanded Brito in significant strikes and total strikes, got more control, and I kind of felt like that was only going to travel in one direction from there forward. But I mean, he seemed to let us lose focus, got ninja choked, and them's the breaks, as they say. So, yeah, minus 4.9 units in the last card. Gonna jump into this one though. I am doing it so late and doing it alone because I am on a work trip out in California, and so I'm gonna try to keep it somewhat short because I'm flying out at 6:15 tomorrow morning. But yeah, I mean, let's get into it. Interesting card, great main event here. Beneil Dariush, Arman Tsarukyan. It's probably one of the better main events we've been given in some time. It's just kind of funny how overlooked the lower weight classes get with these main events. But yeah, it's pretty entertaining top to bottom. First fight of the night, we got Jamie Lynn Horth. She's taking on Veronica Hardy. Line for this fight has been all over the place. Opened with Horth as a decent favorite, minus 175. Got bet all the way back up to Hardy Pick'em. And since about the middle of the week, it has absolutely tanked here. We are at Horth minus 170, come back on Hardy plus 145. Uh, I mean, it's a pretty low level fight, but I think an interesting one in some respects. Hardy normally aside, I would like to bet. She's a far more experienced fighter. She has many more UFC fights. Generally speaking, has fought much, much better competition. And she's taking on a woman who is undefeated so far, but with only 6 fights and against a really low level of competition. That's a dynamic where I'm usually looking to back the dog. But something that's interesting, I think, when you think about this fight is, one fight ago, we had Veronica Hardy up at a plus 375 favorite against Juliana Miller. Now, I mean, in retrospect, that price was obviously not accurate, but it kind of gives you an idea of what the broader market and MMA community thought about Veronica Hardy's game. They thought it was pretty low level, lacked physicality, and didn't have the gas. I didn't see really anybody trying to make a case for Hardy at that price against Miller. And, Miller, I mean, I bet Brogan Walker pretty big against her in tough finale. And I kind of felt vindicated from that fight with Hardy. Miller was pretty much exactly what I thought she was. It just turns out Brogan Walker was a lot worse than I thought she was. But I mean, the fact that Miller was priced that high against her and no one wanted to bet Hardy, and now you see Hardy in much closer line against who's a woman in Jamie Lynn Horth, who's probably a better fighter. To me, is kind of interesting, and it's kind of something that deters me from really having any interest in Hardy. You're not kind of. I talk about markets all the time, but kind of similar to markets, you're not really looking to make a bet on a fighter. You're looking to bet fighters when they're being undervalued. You're not looking to bet them off their career best performance when the entire market was undervaluing them. If anything, you would think someone like that is now overvalued. With respect to the fight itself, though, I mean, it's interesting. I think Hardy's the better striker. I don't particularly rate much, if anything, that Jamie Lynn Horth does. She's not a great striker, very, very hittable. She's not a great grappler, but she is big, and she is one of these fighters who's just not going to fuck off. She's just going to keep on coming at you. And, that's an archetype that's given Hardy problems. First of all, size. We've seen when she's fought bigger women, she's very consistently had issues. Going all the way back to earlier in her career with Ashley Evans Smith, who just size bullied her and dumpstered her, uh, to even right before her last fight where she fought Bea Malecki. And, as we all know, Bea Malecki, not a very good fighter. And you saw Malecki's just willingness to not fuck off, even in the face of getting lit up, just led to Hardy kind of gassing and then crumbling on the back end of that fight. And so I look at this fight, and I do think Hardy is, the better striker. She's got better hands. She actually has some process to her striking game, whereas Hort's pretty hittable. I don't really think she's sure what she's doing at any given time. But and if you told me they were just going to stand a distance for 15 minutes, I'd be pretty happy with a Hardy bet. But like Hort seems pretty happy to engage the clinch, try to push the grappling here or there. And that kind of fight, I just don't think is great for Hardy. Lucrative just mentioned it in the chat here, and I kind of agree. I think the early going in this fight, Hardy should be able to have success striking. But I can't say Juliana Miller didn't really push her enough to make me think that her gas tank issues are fixed. I've seen her slow down enough times in her career when she's been physically pushed that until I see someone try to physically push her and her not slow down, I'm just inclined to believe that's the case. And so I kind of looked at it as like first round's probably competitive, maybe even lean Hardy. But I kind of think the third round is pretty likely to be a blowout with the way Horth fights. And the second round, things will probably start going downhill. Now, maybe that won't happen, but just the fact that Horth's got so much size on her, is coming down from 135, and Hardy, even against Miller in a fight where she mostly controlled it, she looked like she was starting to slow a bit down the stretch there too. I just can't get on board. I think the line's about accurate. If she comes out here and just owns Miller, I wouldn't be shocked. Like that tends to happen with these undefeated prospects who've never been tested. But I don't trust the physical intangibles of Veronica Hardy. So the pick's going to be Jamie Lynn Horth. Moving on, Jared Gooden, Wellington Turman. Turman minus 190, comeback on Gooden, plus 165. I initially thought I would bet Gooden here just because I've been so scarred from Wellington Turman. He's not as good as I thought he would be. That's pretty clear. Obviously, there's some questions about his chin and his defense. His grappling, he's got a black belt, but I think can be sloppy. He's a guy we saw largely lose a fight to Carl Roberson where he lost it via top time. In retrospect, that's horrendous. So I was thinking, Gooden's a brown belt, should be able to keep the standing for large swaths of this fight. And he certainly got the better hardware of the two and more power. How can he be plus 165? But the more I look at it, Gooden, I will give him credit. He is tough. He does throw with intent, but I don't actually think he is very, very good at much. I guess he's an okay boxer, but it's kind of unorthodox boxing. It's like a really shitty version of Bobby Green, like hands down. But unlike Bobby, who's constantly rolling shots and looking to counter off them, he just kind of gets punched square in the face a whole lot. I don't really love the way he disengages from the clinch. I don't think it's ideal, especially against the guy who is relatively strong in that position in Turman. And also on top of that, I like betting on experienced fighters, but at this point, Jared Gooden, the guy's got 31 fights in his career. I think he's more or less a finished product here. I don't think we should be expecting really many improvements from him at this juncture. Whereas Turman, one fight ago, he certainly exceeded my expectations against Randy Brown. I thought Brown won the fight, but it was a pretty competitive fight. I thought Turman did some really strong work in the clinch, and I thought the leg kicks were a pretty interesting wrinkle. And so I look at this fight, I don't have a bet on it just because I still do have the same fragility concerns with Turman that I've always kind of had, which is that He is kind of chinny, and the last thing I want to see is a repeat of the Roberson fight where the dude just refuses to put a body triangle in on back takes and just ends up on bottom and just gives away rounds like that. Um, so ultimately, it's a pass for me, but I do think Turman has the skills to win this fight fairly handily. But look, Gooden's a tough fighter. If he knocks him out or stands in there and just makes it close via hardware, I'm not really surprised at it. So it's a pass for me, but Turman's the pick. Moving on, kind of hilarious fight here. We got Rodolfo Villado. He's minus 400. He's taking on Ihor Bateria, who's plus 300. Um, I think Villado is probably a decent prospect, to be honest. His only two career losses are Vitor Petrino, so it's like I can't really, hate on him for that. I will say, other than those, he's fought a fairly weak level of competition, but I think he's got decent skills. Good jiu-jitsu. He's a decent wrestler for the weight class. He's got really good power for the weight class. I have two concerns with Villado in the context of this fight. The first being it's his debut. You don't really ever know how guys are going to react to that kind of situation. The second being that I get the sense from Bellato, despite the fact that he's got a grappling advantage in most fights, he likes to bang. And at the 205-pound weight class, that's kind of a concern, especially against the guy in Pateria who also really, really likes to bang. Pateria's got okay hands. He's got okay pop. He's a bit explosive. So, like, I think Bellato, there's a decent chance he's going to give Pateria, the fight that he needs to win this fight. Even though I do think if he just opts to grapple, he's going to win this fight fairly easily. But with that said, the question I keep going back and forth on is betting on a Pateria early KO, like, is that a 25% outcome? Because it really is hard for me to see Pateria winning this fight if it extends. Like I said, I think Bellato's tenacious, and I think he can maintain a pace longer than a lot of guys in this weight class, and I don't think Pateria can at all. Just in general, Pateria is a guy who I just haven't really seen much to like. Obviously, he's got a UFC win against Shogun, but you stick Shogun in there with 95% of the division at this point, he's getting knocked out. Uh, Getting dumpstered by Nikolai Negamarianu is a pretty brutal look to me. I would rate Nikolai pretty close to, if not at the absolute bottom of the division, and he ran through Pateria in that fight. And so, yeah, I think Bellato should win. I think he should probably finish here. I think he's got the tools to win this fight everywhere. But at the same time, I'm not dying to parlay him or play him in any capacity. If anything, I would kind of lean towards the Pateria side here. I even considered a Pateria bet. It's just like I don't feel like if he was like plus 500 or plus 600, sure, maybe you bet on him with the round one upside. I guess you could maybe make an argument for, betting Pateria to win by KO in round one, which is plus 800. I think that's an interesting poke in this fight. But I don't think Ihor is going to be around very long. I think Bellato will be. So at the moment, I'm not playing anything. Maybe I'd sprinkle here KO one, but I think Rodolfo should really handle this fight however he wants. Next fight of the night, though, banger here. This has fight of the night upside if it extends long enough to really be the fight of the night. We got Steve Garcia. He's taking on Melquizael Costa. Costa pretty chalked up here. A minus 250 against Garcia, plus 210. It's a weird fight. There's a part of me that wants to bet Steve here just because I think the market's probably overly high on Costa off of moderately competing with Moises and beating Austin Lingo, but I don't even think Costa is like a bad fighter. Like I think he is UFC caliber for sure. He's got a pretty good kick game, good body kicks, good leg kicks. I like his volume. He does get enough volume off to be competitive with a lot of guys in this division. Good jiu-jitsu, okay wrestler, and I think he has some deficiencies in the defensive wrestling department. I have a suspicion solid wrestlers are just going to wreck this guy, or maybe not wreck him because he's got good jiu-jitsu, but get him down like fairly easily. And defensively, I think his striking, we didn't see it against Lingo, but like Austin Lingo, let's not forget Austin Lingo made a large portion of the market think Yusuf Zalal was a top prospect. The guy just can't cut the cage at all. He's just very, very plodding and very, very linear in his movements. I mean, so it was really the kind of perfect guy for Costa to fight, where he could just sit back, rip his leg kicks, rip his body kicks, pick his shots very, very easily. And something that kind of, I don't want to say disturbed me, but what I felt was noteworthy was that, he took Lingo down 3 times in that fight, but Lingo stuffed a fair amount of his takedowns, and Lingo's defensive wrestling is really bottom of the barrel, in my opinion. So I'm not really sure that Costa's grappling is going to really translate on this level. And on the other side, you have Steve Garcia, who, I mean, Steve Garcia is as fun as it gets. Love watching the guy fight. Got decent offensive tools, a lot of power, decent boxer. I think he's a decent wrestler, but he is maybe the most hilariously killable fighter I've ever seen in the UFC. Like, I'm not even sure, the narrative with Garcia is he's chinny. I'm not even sure if the dude is chinny or he just overextends so much on his shot with his chin unprotected that he's just getting kicked clean over and over and over again. I think he's been dropped 6 times in the UFC so far, and it's always the same deal. He comes at someone hyper aggressively, gets countered hard, and gets put down. Um, Obviously, that's not great. So, I mean, Garcia is always going to be someone to be wary about until and unless he cleans that tendency up, and I'm wary about it in this spot. But I do think Garcia can have, I kind of feel like the market is maybe pricing in how reckless and defensively void Garcia is, while not at all pricing in the fact that Costa's pocket defense is pretty much non-existent itself. And so I don't know. Like, I'm probably not going to bet it, but I've considered a bet on Garcia because I do think these guys are going to bang it out. Like, I can't imagine seeing Steve let Costa just hang on the outside and kick with him. He's going to bomb the pocket here, try to crush base and force exchanges. Uh, but Costa, while hittable, I think does a much better job of protecting the chin than Garcia. So, like, I do have to favor him in those exchanges. Grappling is kind of interesting because I actually think Garcia is the better wrestler here, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets multiple takedowns. And so with that in mind, it's like, well, why wouldn't you bet Garcia? It's like the one thing that sticks kind of in my craw is that Pena fight. And that fight was years ago, so I don't want to overvalue it. But I mean, the way Luis Pena was able to just get like 11 minutes of control, just basically counter grappling Garcia, makes me pretty concerned against a guy like Costa who will put a body triangle in. I'm not sure. I mean, he doesn't have the length that Pena had at all. And I'm not sure he's as, I don't even want to call Pena's jiu-jitsu slick. It's just like, it's almost like Hooper-esque in that it's very, very unorthodox and very hard to prep for. And I don't think Costa is necessarily that. But still, that fight gives me a lot of pause. But I'm thinking about the Garcia side here. I haven't made a bet, and I might pass. Like I said, it's just watching the way Garcia gets nuked in every fight. It's hard to think he won't get wobbled once or twice here too. And it's like, is plus 200 enough for that when that's a likely outcome? I don't know. My pick's Costa, but I think Garcia definitely has the tools to keep this fight competitive. Moving on, really cool fight here. We got Joe Selecki. He's taking on Drakkar Klose. Very interesting. Close is minus 125. The comeback on Selecki's plus 105. And I think in a lot of respects, this is almost a mirror match to the Sean Brady and Kelvin Gastelum fight on the main card. Obviously, lower weight class. These guys are different fighters. Close, obviously, a very, very different fighter to Gastelum, and Selecki, probably a more limited fighter than Sean Brady is. But I do think the dynamic here is similar in that if Selecki can get him down, he's probably going to dominate this fight. Close gives his back up to get up in every single fight, and Selecki does. I don't rate a lot of Selecki's game. I don't think he's a very good striker. I don't think he's a great wrestler. I think he's pretty hittable on the feet. But if he gets fights down, he's got excellent jiu-jitsu. He's an elite back taker. If he gets to your back, I mean, that's the round pretty much. And Drakkar's showing us time and again, he will give his back to get up. And sometimes I try to be a little bit cautious about using that tendency just because, the fighters aren't idiots. They know the guys they're fighting have jiu-jitsu. So, like, sometimes you'll see people talk about, oh, so-and-so gives their back to get up, but it's like they know they're fighting a guy with good jiu-jitsu, they don't do it. The thing is with Drakkar Klose, we've seen him do it against multiple guys with good jiu-jitsu. Benny, he gave away the entire first round doing it. Christos Giagos, who's average jiu-jitsu, but gave him his back multiple times. The guy got mounted by Lando Venata. And so, like, I look at the fight and it's like, if Selecki gets him down, he's going to probably take his back, get to a dominant position, and ride out rounds there. What I'm less sure about is that Selecki's going to be able to get him down. I don't think Close has the best takedown defense for like the top of the division per se. But like you look at the guys who have been really, getting him down, and it's like Beneil Dariush. I don't really care about that. Much better athlete than Selecki is, much more physical, much better wrestler. Giagos. I mean, Christos Giagos, when he's fresh, Giagos is. I don't want to say he's a mythical creature, but Giagos is a tough motherfucker when he's fresh. A good wrestler, very, very explosive. And then you have like a guy like Rafa Garcia. Now Garcia doesn't have the slick jiu-jitsu that Close has or that Selecki has, but Garcia is strong as an ox. Selecki's none of those things, and so I'm a bit wary about whether I think he can get easy takedowns here. And given how hard Close rips calf kicks, I think takedowns could be harder and harder to get as this fight goes on if he can keep it standing for stretches. So it's an interesting fight. I'm kind of leaning to the Joe side here just because I heard someone say this week, and I thought it was a good take. Close does tend to kind of overextend himself sometimes and become pretty easy to read where his hips are. And, Selecki, while I don't think he's much of a striker, he does tend to time his takedown attempts very, very well. And so, like, my view is I think you almost have to favor Selecki if it goes 15 to get 2 to 3 takedowns here. And I say that because if Close had more power to kind of deny Selecki, I would be much more hesitant. The problem is, outside of like Brandon Jenkins, Close isn't finishing anybody. The guy doesn't, I don't want to say he can't bust a grape. He's got solid power, but it's nothing scary that's going to keep Selecki really on the back foot, I don't think. And so, yeah, I lean to the Selecki side, but I'm not passionate about it again. Like, I think Selecki's just so physically limited, and he's fighting a guy who's likely much stronger and who does real attritional work. It kind of scares me. I think it's a binary fight, and I think the winner is going to look pretty dominant in retrospect. Moving on, this is the first bet of the night I have. We got Cody Brundage taking on Zach Reese. I put 1.5 on Cody Brundage at plus 240. I think he still could be worth a small poke here. Cody Brundage is one of the worst fighters to ever do it. Guy's gassy, wilty, makes terrible, terrible in octagon decisions. Fully know all of this going into this fight and into this breakdown, which is why I don't have a huge bet on him, to be honest. Because I look at this fight and I just do not see it with Zach Reese at all in terms of being like a UFC level fighter. I don't think he's a very good striker. He's very, very easy to hit. He's a terrible wrestler, like absolutely terrible. And he's got some opportunistic submissions, but I don't think he is particularly good at submission grappling. Now, with that being said, it's Cody Brundage. That Cody Brundage could find a way to get himself subbed here. I have no doubt about that. But like Cody Brundage, yeah, he's shit compared to the UFC. But like I look at the guys Brundage has been fighting, and I'm like, which of those guys would I not make a good size favorite against Zachary Reese? Like the market bet Brundage to minus 200 against SD Dumas. I am not a Dumas fan, but I'd make him an easy favorite against Zachary Reese. That was 2 fights ago. Lost to Vieira, would make a huge favorite against Reese. Lost to Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, would make a huge favorite against Reese. Beat Tresean Gorodalcha, would probably make both of them a favorite against Zachary Reese. Lost to Nick Maximov. Again, would make a large favorite against Zachary Reese. You go back to his last LFA fight, Joseph Cropshot, like that is along the lines of what I think Reese is as a talent. Cropshot's like an okay regional fighter. He's probably a bit less dangerous than Reese is, but like I look at Reese's game and I just don't see anything that's particularly high level. He's certainly not a high level striker. I don't think he's a high level grappler. I think he's a bad wrestler. And in terms of his cardio, maybe it's good. We don't really know. The guy has barely fought out of a round, and it's mostly just been against trash that he's been fighting. So yeah, I mean, Brundage is really, really bad. And if you tell me like Zachary Reese knocks him out or finds an opportunistic submission here, or Brundage just does exactly what he did in the Damas fight and just keeps jumping guillotines and gives the fight away. Am I surprised? Not one bit. But I'm equally unsurprised if you tell me Brundage goes out here and just absolutely mauls this guy. I would not be surprised at all if Brundage dominates him. Yeah, Brundage hasn't been 15-minute mauling guys in the UFC, but he did it pre-UFC. I'm also not surprised that Brundage just outstrikes him. I don't really think there's any striking gap here. I think you have to give some credence to Reese's finishing ability, and when you combine that with just how happy Cody Brundage is to kind of want out of fights, that is, yeah, I mean, the fight should be competitively lined. Even probably Reese being a favorite is probably fine, especially given from what we've seen from Cody recently. I just think all of the upside in this fight is on the Brundage side. Again, not passionate. It's a unit and a half. I wish we had someone who was a more reliable fighter, but when the skill gap, especially when the wrestling gap's as big as it is here, I have to back Brundage here. Getting a guy with 14 fights, with 8 UFC fights against a guy with 6 fights who's never been out of a round, who's fought literally nobody, you have to take that at plus 200, in my opinion, anyway. So I'm on Brundage. We'll see how he manages to fuck it up, but I like him in the spot. Moving on, though, we got Miesha Tate taking on Julia Avila. A lot of line movement here as well. We're down to Avila minus 128, Tate plus 108 at the comeback. It's a really interesting fight. Not a fight I'm going to bet on, but I do think there's a lot of interesting dynamics here. The first being that I think Avila has somewhat significant issues if you can put her on her back. We saw Sijara Eubanks, I mean, just maul her in every way. And now, I mean, Eubanks, she's a very, very good grappler. Don't get me wrong. So it's like I'm not like hating on her for that, but the fact that she looked so clueless on bottom and was letting Eubanks pass her guard as easy as she was seemed pretty alarming to me, especially taking on a fighter like Miesha Tate, who is, in theory, a pretty good wrestler. Obviously, wrestling was for a long time her bread and butter in the UFC. And so, that's a concern on the Avila side. With that said, if you look at the stand up here, Avila, I mean, just the hardware she has for WMMA is off the charts. So very, very dynamic, very fast, very powerful, um, very explosive against Miesha Tate, who really can't bust the grape or really threaten you at all on the feet. And so, like, I think Tate, based on the tape, is massively outgunned standing in this fight. But the other side of that is Julia Avila is coming off an ACL surgery, had a baby, and more or less 3 years off. That's a long time off for someone who's in their mid-30s, and you'd be a fool not to say that there couldn't be some, like, fairly substantial decline here. Like, I think that is a very, very live outcome. And so that would, to me, put another point in the Tate column here. But at the same time, I can't get over seeing the Tate Murphy fight, and it's not that Tate lost to Lauren Murphy. Lauren Murphy obviously been fighting near the top of the women's 125 division. She generally competes with everybody unless she's giving away a massive physical edge. The problem for me is how badly Tate got out grappled in that fight. She tried to wrestle her, couldn't. Murphy was actually the one getting control time in that fight. And to me, if she couldn't out grapple Lauren Murphy, she's very likely going to have a hard time out grappling Avila unless Avila is massively declined. So, like, taking that fight in the context of this one, it's like I can't bet Tate here against Julia Avila, especially with the physicality and athleticism edge for Avila here. But again, like I said, Avila coming off a huge layoff, having a baby, and a major surgery. I can't, in her mid 30s. It's not like she's 29. I just can't get there on the Avila side of things either. So my gut is that this is Avila here, and she should be able to use her strength and physicality to just keep this upright and just beat Tate up. But if Tate can get on top of her and get takedowns, she could look like a dominant favorite here. Like, that wouldn't be surprising. So to me, it's an easy pass, but I think it's an interesting fight. Moving on, fight that I wish I had taped earlier in the week, and if I wasn't away, I probably would have. We have Punahele Soriano. He's taking on Dustin Stz-fist. This line's been getting slammed the last 24 hours or so. Soriano is out to minus 344. Come back on Stz-fist plus 284. I don't see a lot of paths to victory here for Dustin, to be honest. And it's funny because, my view on Puna is, or my opinion of Puna's game in the context of the UFC is fairly low. Obviously, dude's got tremendous hardware and physicality, but he's gassy. He's not a great control grappler. He makes bad decisions. He can be hittable. All things I'm looking to fade, especially when a guy is minus 250. And so, when I went to tape, I started taping it last night when this line was going nuts. But I just thinking, maybe I'll like Dustin Stz-fist here, but I just don't see it, man. The guy, I guess he's an okay grappler. He's an okay wrestler. Allegedly has a black belt. Okay boxer, but the truth is I don't think he's really any of those things. Like, I think his boxing's below average at best. I think he is fairly fragile. I don't think he has the best gas tank in the world, and I don't really think he's much of a wrestler. I actually think, that in most fights, I'm very concerned about Puna's cardio and him just going for the kill early and gassing out. If you go back to his Contender Series fight, though, with Jamie Pickett, you saw him go for it early and then manage to kind of just physically bully Pickett the last 2 rounds despite being gassed out, and I kinda think it's the same dynamic here. Even if he gasses to a point where he can't kill, Stoltzfus anymore, I think he's the better boxer. His shots are straighter, his shots are faster. He's the far more durable fighter of the 2, and if he has to, I think he can default to his wrestling and just control Stoltzfus if he is tired enough. And at the end of the day, look, I mean, Puna Soriano, his career hasn't been what some people hoped it would be, but the he's fought a decent level of competition in the UFC. Like, his losses were a close fight with Maximov, Brendan Allen, and Roman Kopylov. Uh, all of which, except the Maximov fight, have aged well, but like I still don't think Maximov is a bad fighter, and I think Maximov would absolutely maul Dustin Stoltzfus. Whereas Stoltzfus, the guy's barely getting by to a decision against Dwight Grant. And so, like, I look at the fight and Stoltzfus, let's say this goes 15, he keeps it upright somehow and outvolumes Soriano by 30 strikes. I still think Soriano's probably going to win that decision because just the difference in power shots is going to be massive here. So I think this line is more like Soriano minus 400, minus 450. Am I going to spray the 344? Probably not. I would have hit the 250. I think that was a pretty good bet. But I think this is a pretty good get right spot for Punahele Soriano here. I do think his KO line is kind of interesting, though. I haven't decided about bet it yet. I don't really like playing props that are near pick generally, and his is minus 115. That's not great. But Stoltzfus is a black belt, and Puna, I mean, I guess he could club him and guillotine him, but that's not usually really his game. And I do think he's going to hurt Stoltzfus here at a pretty high clip. I don't know. I don't know if I'll play it, but I think it's kind of interesting. Anyway, moving on though. Clay Guida, the ageless wonder, taking on Joaquim Silva. Current price on Silva minus 305. Comeback on Guida plus 255. I mean, intuitively, I want to like Guida in the spot. Obviously, you see Clay, and Clay's a great minute winner. I faded him 2 fights ago with Scott Holtzman. That was absolutely horrendous. And I guess, you could kind of game it out in your head where Clay, minimizes exchanges on the feet and lands a bunch of takedowns to a decision, and that could definitely happen. I have some concerns about Clay's work rate in general lately, though, where it seems to just be falling off, and it's been tremendously inconsistent. He tried to wrestle Holtzman very, very hard, but if you take that fight away, you have the Leo Santos fight where he wrestled a bit. Then you have the Mark Madsen fight, a guy who posed no jiu-jitsu threat whatsoever, and Guida just hung on the outside and was content to lose a close split decision to a gassy guy who can't keep a pace. And then you have his last fight with Rafa Garcia, and it was a nice performance for Garcia, but again, very gassy guy who's not even a particularly dangerous jiu-jitsu threat, and Guida just stuck on the outside and let Rafa 1-2 him for 3 rounds. And so we have this sample where, like, 3 of his last 5 fights, he really hasn't pushed the wrestling at all. So can you really expect him to push it here, especially against a somewhat dangerous submission grappler? And on, the Silva side of things, is he gonna get controlled? I guess he could, but Silva's dangerous enough that he could put Clay in a lot of danger if he wrestles. And also, he scrambled up against better wrestlers than Clay. So I don't know that I think Clay will control him. I think there's a pretty reasonable chance that Clay just doesn't wrestle at all and hangs out on the outside. Like, it was very weird, the Rafa fight. Like, it almost felt like watching that he was just there to, collect a check. I'm not a psychologist, so I have no idea if that's true or not, but it was just against a gassy guy like Rafa who was taken down multiple times by Natan Levy. It was a very, very odd performance, in my opinion. So, and on the feet, I mean, Clay just has no volume at all. He beats no one on the feet these days. He hasn't in like 5 or 6 years. I mean, Silva's volume's low, but again, kind of similar to what I was talking about with Soriano and Stoltzfus. The hardware difference and power difference is just dramatic here. He's going to land the harder shots. He's going to land the better shots in this fight. Um, he's got massive, massive edge in finishing equity. I know Silva's been chinned before. Guida, not really much of a hitter himself, though. And so, yeah, I mean, could the line be wide? I suppose. But you take into account all the things I just said. You take into account the fact that he's 42 years old, taking on a 34-year-old. I think the line's probably fine. I did bet the over small, though, which may be dangerous because Clay does have a tendency to stick his neck into guillotines, and I could see that happening here. But Clay's been pretty durable to the head, the last 5 years or so. And thank you, Quinn. I appreciate it. Means a lot. Clay's been durable to the head the last 5 years or so. He's also not forcing, and he's actively avoiding exchanges on the feet. So if he does stand, I don't think they're going to exchange heavy very often over the course of this fight. And if he does grapple, like, I think he can get subbed here. Like, Silva's a very dangerous submission grappler, despite the fact that he doesn't have a sub in the UFC. But I mean, what percentage outcome does that happen at? Like, I really think Clay finish is like a subterranean chances of it happening. I feel like they should go the distance at like 55, 60%, in that range. Like, I think more likely than not. And currently it's plus money on the over. So I like the over here. But I think Silva, I can see the argument for a Clay Guida win here. I just feel like at this point, unless Clay's shooting 20 takedowns and getting loads of top time, he's just losing minutes everywhere these days. And he could even lose minutes in that event. Silva almost subbed Jared Gordon, who was taking him down consistently a couple times. So I have a feeling Clay's going to keep it upright, and we're just going to see a lot of staring and Silva landing better shots. But yeah, Silva's the pick. I like the over. Very, very small. But yeah, that's what I like. Moving on. This is the other match that was similar to Selecki and close. We got Sean Brady. He's taking on Kelvin Gastelum. Current price, Brady minus 120. Comeback on Gastelum plus 100. Don't really know what to do with this here. There's a part of me that wants to bet Gastelum, but I mean, it seems like everybody is on Gastelum this week. The line hasn't really moved that much. That's generally somewhat of a concern. And he has one of the exact same issues that Drakkar Klose has, which is he's very, very happy to get his back to get up. And Brady, as we've seen, is an absolutely elite back taker with very, very good jiu-jitsu. So, I mean, Brady just backpacking him and or subbing him in this fight early, it's a live outcome. At the same time, Brady historically hasn't shot that much in his career, surprisingly, for a guy who's been known as a grappler. He's been pretty happy to bang it out and just kind of opportunistically shoot takedowns. Not a guy who's coming out and attempting 15 to 20 takedowns in a fight. Something that was a bit alarming to me about the Belal fight. It wasn't that he lost. I mean, him losing to Belal Muhammad, I don't really care too much about that. Bilal's obviously a top 5 fighter. That is what it is. And Bilal's got good takedown defense. It's that when Belal decided to press the issue there, he was pretty happy to see the center. And one, you could tell him moving laterally as much as it did slowed him down, over the course of that fight. But two, his shots when he was trying to shoot off the back foot to get to Bilal's hips were just really not good. And I'll put it this way. The reason Belal was defending those takedowns was not because he has elite takedown defense. Now, I do think he does have elite takedown defense, but those shots they were very, very weak. They weren't set up at all, and they were just very easy to fend off for Belal, which is concerning to me that if he gets – and Kelvin will, occasionally pressure. And if he does pressure Brady here, you could end up in a similar situation. And the shots coming back from Kelvin are a lot harder than the shots that Bilal was throwing at him. I also think it's worth mentioning the last time we saw Brady in there with a southpaw was Michael Chiesa, who looked like, prime Floyd Mayweather or prime Manny Pacquiao with the way he was just one-twoing him in the third round of that fight, which is pretty bigly concerning for Brady as well here. So I think it could go a number of ways. If Brady can get Bilal down, or not Bilal, I'm sorry. If Brady can get Kelvin down in this fight, I think I shouldn't even say I think he can get to dominant positions here, potentially sub him and ride this fight out. But if he can't, it's pretty interesting. And I do actually think on the other side of that, Brady has probably a better chance to keep a competitive standing than people would give him credit for. I don't think his striking is good, but we've seen Gastelum just really, he'll lose a close decision to a no volume guy like Darren Till, and then go to a close decision with Jared Cannonier. The guy just seems to fight very, very close with everybody he fights on the feet. And for what it's worth, Brady's striking actually looked okay early against Bilal. But with that said, I do think Gastelum is the better striker. He's the more durable fighter. He's the harder hitter by a lot. His leg kicks could be a factor here, I think. But yeah, I don't know if I want to get there on Gastelum. I'm a bit spooked by the line versus what I've seen in terms of people betting this fight. I'm a bit spooked by the fact that 2 takedowns could literally be the fight for similar to Close and Selecki. I don't know. And on top of that, I was chatting with my boy Pepe earlier today about this, but Kelvin has really for a guy who's got literally almost 30 UFC fights, Kelvin, I don't want to say his striking schedule has been soft. It certainly hasn't been soft. He's fought a ton of killers, but he's also fought like a ton of old men. This guy, he's fought very few guys at the top. Well, he's fought some guys at the top of the division, but he's had a very weird run of like old guys. I don't know. I, I kind of am leaning the Kelvin side just because I do like the experience angle. I do think there are outcomes here where Kelvin can potentially get taken down and scramble. He is a black belt. It's 10th planet black belt, granted, so kind of fake, but he is a guy that I could see, maybe squirming his way out of a body triangle if it does happen at some point. And especially with, the current state of judging, which is prioritizing damage to a gross extent over control. I can see the angle for it, but I don't know. I mean, gun to my head, I'm kind of going to pick Kelvin here, but I don't know. I don't think I'm going to bet it. It's a very cool fight. I'm excited to see it, and I'm pretty happy to watch it. And honestly, maybe take a live angle into it, especially if rounds are close early. Maybe try to get on Kelvin live. But I mean, we'll see. Moving on, another absolutely awesome fight here. We got Rob Font. He's taking on Dibson Figueiredo. I really like Font here. No surprise if you've been watching the show for a while. Big Font stan. Not because I love Rob Font so much as a fan of watching him fight. I just like, pretty much everything Rob Font does in the context of winning fights. The guy is basically Max Holloway with a bit of a worse chin, but by that I mean he is an absolute volume machine with elite cardio who, despite how last fight looked, historically has been a decent grappler. Those are the kind of guys, I want to bet on. Guys who are just going to throw a ton of strikes no matter who they're facing, who have some finishing ability and have great cardio. And, what you're going to get from Font. He's going to come out. He's going to push the pace from minute 1 all the way to minute 15. And he can get hit at times and he can get rocked at times. And, that's the concern here. Because on the other side, you have the former flyweight champion, Deiveson Figueiredo. Some people would call him a great flyweight champion. I personally think he's probably skill-wise one of the more overrated fighters to ever come into the UFC. Now, I will say what he did at flyweight, I mean, it was very fun to watch and it worked, but I think it worked because he was a durability bully. The guy had elite durability at 125 and elite power. He just bullied people on hardware and it worked. But, even his entire run at flyweight, even prior to the Moreno fights, this was a guy who was a minus minute winner, who could give up positions on the mat, But on the feet, he was someone you could outstrike. I mean, you look at there were many fights in his career he's been outlanded. I mean, Tim Elliott was piecing this guy up on the feet before he got guillotined against him. The guy for his career has been outlanded a distance. Like that's pretty wild. Now you factor in the fact that he was a large-ish flyweight. Frankly, I don't think he was as large as people make it sound. He was 5'5" with a 68-inch reach. Pretty good build for flyweight, but now he's moving up to bantamweight where he's going to be an absolutely tiny bantamweight, taking on a decent sized bantamweight in Rob Font, who's 5'8" with a 71-inch reach. You look at the two metrically, and it's like Figueiredo is a guy who consistently loses minutes on the feet, taking on a guy who basically never loses minutes on the feet. Both of whom have fought good competition. It's not a case where, Figueiredo, he loses minutes on the feet because he's been fighting elite guys and Font hasn't. Font's been fighting elite guys for some time and he's consistently winning minutes against them. And so minute to minute, I favor Font dramatically. If this goes 15 minutes, he is going to outland Figueiredo by many, many strikes, like almost a guarantee. The question is, can Figueiredo do what we saw Marlon Vera and Jose Aldo do a couple years ago, which is, win the fight via attrition and knockdowns? And I think it's something that can happen. We've seen him hurt, but I mentioned this before Font fought Adrian Yanez, and I think it bears mentioning again. I think those fights get taken dramatically out of context. And by out of context, I mean, Aldo hurts him bad in round one, fractures his orbital, and then just about every time he lands on it, he's hurting him the rest of that fight. The Vera fight, people act like he had bad durability. The dude got hit with a spinning back kick to the chin and 2 flying knees. Like, it was not as if the guy was just eating like jabs and keeling over. He kept coming at Vera even past that too. And so everybody's takeaway was Font's durability's cracked. And it's like, okay, why don't you let Marlon Vera hit you with a flying knee? Tell me how it feels. I said that before the Yanez fight because everybody kept telling me, oh, Yanez is going to knock him out. Font's chin is dust. And Font hung in the pocket with Yanez just fine up until the knockout in that fight. So I think that's overrated. I will say, I do think the fact that Font, his eye is a bit of a concern to me. It obviously broke against Aldo, got swollen up against Vera again, and it was swollen up again against Yanez. Yanez didn't hurt him, but it did seem like he hurt his eye again. So, and that seems like something that could just be a concern going forward with Rob Font. But I think the durability thing is overstated. And then if you look at the Figgy side of things, look, this is a guy who basically has made a living off of his elite power, but that's elite power at 125. Is he going to be carrying the same power at 135? Like, he doesn't hit as hard as Jose Aldo does. He doesn't hit as hard as Adrian Yanez does. He doesn't have the dynamic. He's not as dynamic as Marlon Vera is. I'm like very certain about all of these things. So like, go let Jose Aldo, fight with some flyweights and see what the results look like. They'll be a lot more dramatic than what Davis and Figueiredo's are. Now, will he carry some power up a weight class? I think he will. I'm not saying he's going to go from being like the biggest puncher in flyweight history to being a, powder puff puncher at 135. But I am saying I think it's, and again, we won't really know until we see it, right? Maybe he does hold all his power. It's possible. But I think it's pretty fair to project a fair amount of regression for Figueiredo's power going up in weight. And then in terms of the durability, I actually think people are perhaps overlooking durability concerns on the Figueiredo side of things. The last couple fights with Moreno, he was getting hurt a fair amount. He never had the best defense at the best of times, but Moreno hurt him 4 or 5 times across those last 3 fights. And now he's moving up and taking on guys who are going to be hitting way harder than Brandon Moreno. And I think Font almost certainly hits a lot harder than Brandon Moreno hits. So, yeah, I kind of think that there's maybe too much stock being put in Font's durability and not enough in Figueiredo's. And then the last factor is really the grappling here. I think there's probably some bias baked in after Font got dominated on the mat for 25 by Corey Sandhagen. Surprising outcome to some, myself included, to be honest. But I also kind of think that's kind of downplaying like Sandhagen's grappling and the improvements he's made there. People forget the fight before that. Sandhagen absolutely mauled Marlon Vera on the mat for 2 rounds. And Vera, not the best get-up game, but usually pretty dangerous off his back, and he just got absolutely thumped there. So, I mean, it's clearly been a part of Sandhagen's game that he's been working on. Whereas Figueiredo, it's like, could he come out here and out-grapple Rob Font? I guess, but it's like Rob Font won a decision against Ricky Simone where he got taken down 6 times. Like, I would be pretty I'd be pretty surprised if Figueiredo had, like, huge grappling success. And I'd be pretty surprised if Font had huge grappling success. I wouldn't be surprised if either landed a takedown or two, but I think it's mostly gonna be standing, and I think the gigantic volume edge on the Font side is going to likely lead him to a victory, but I see the angle for Figueiredo winning this via hurting Font a few times and or knocking him out. I personally think Font should be closer to, like, the -185 range here. I have 3 units on him at -138. Yeah, I think Rob Font takes care of business. So we will see. Moving on though, we have another very, very interesting fight here. We got Jalen Turner taking on Bobby Green. Current line, Jalen Turner -194. The comeback on Bobby Green +169. I I actually think, I saw this fight get booked. I saw the line come out and I was like, this is obviously Bobby Green. Like, I'm definitely betting Bobby Green. And then I looked into it more, and I'm starting to kind of lean to there maybe being value on the Turner side of this fight. I like, it's short notice, and Turner's media day interview was pretty concerning, and I get all that, and I understand that, but it's also one of those things where it's like, you gotta be careful how much stock you put into that. Jalen Turner's a 28-year-old savage, man. Like, this guy is, like, he's 1 to 2 fights from being right back in, like, legitimate world title contention. He's 28 years old. Do you think this guy is taking a short notice fight with Bobby Green that he did you really think he didn't want the fight, that he didn't want it because he said that in the media day interview, and he's taking a short notice fight to potentially knock him out of the rankings and further away from contention? I just don't really think that that's likely. Maybe it is. That would be remarkably dumb, but it doesn't seem like a likely outcome to me. In terms of the fight, I think it's easy to see why a lot of people think that there's value on the Green side. The Green, obviously, very, very good boxer, fast hands, fights out of both stances, uh, rolls shots really well, counters really well. Obviously, he's a decent wrestler and he's a decent defensive wrestler. Just very, very well-rounded fighter. I mean, he's one of my favorite fighters ever. He probably is my favorite fighter. Just, Bobby Green dude's the man. Great backstory, great podcast on Joe Rogan. Absolutely hilarious when you listen to him talk. And he's made a little bit of a run for himself here the last couple of years. And so in a fight that's going to be mostly a striking fight, it's easy to see why, you would think Bobby Green being at like +170 or +165, would be value here. But then the more I think about the fight, Jalen Turner, first of all, I mean, we all know Jalen Turner is an absolutely massive lightweight. Dude, 6'3", 77-inch reach to Green's 5'10" with a 70-inch reach. That's a pretty big deal. There's a pretty significant age gap here, which is, Turner's 28, Green's 37. Also, maybe not as big a deal because we've seen decent quality out of Bobby lately, but I think it's something worth, a notch worth putting in the Turner column. And then you look at Turner striking, and, the one thing I keep hearing about this fight is how hittable Turner is, and he's got 41% defense. And I can't deny those things, like that is true. But what you'll find if you look a little closer into that is he's also out attempting his opponents nearly 2-1 for his career. And the reason for that is, yes, if you can get inside of Turner's reach, he is there to be cracked. But it is very, very hard to get in there. He maintains distance well. He keeps his volume high. If you do get inside of his reach and you start exchanging with him, he's one of the heaviest hitters in the division. And for a guy who is as large as he has shockingly fast hands. And so it deters a lot of people from trying to get in the pocket with him. And that's nice for Turner because Turner also has, a pretty good kick game, very good body kicks, showed off some decent leg kicks against Dan Hooker in his last fight. The dude, his frame just causes a lot of problems for people, and he knows how to use it very, very well. And, I think about this fight, and, you look at Bobby Green and Bobby Green's whole career. Bobby Green's never been the guy that is, going to bite down on the mouthpiece and go shot for shot in the pocket. He's going to try to be slick. He's going to try to throw volume from the outside, jab you, try to bait you in, counter you, roll his shoulders, move off, step off the center line, do some really, really fancy, pretty stuff. And it's awesome to watch. And Bobby typically has pretty high volume. But you've seen when Bobby has gotten himself into heavy pocket exchanges with big hitters, it's rarely really gone well for him. And that's basically the story of Bobby's career, by the way. Like, if you want to go look back at every time in Bobby's career he's been badly outgunned, he's literally never won. You go back, you look at the Drew Dober fight. Bobby had a lot of success on the outside early in that fight, but eventually Dober was able to crush the distance, knock him out. You go back even further than that, the Fiziev fight. Good fight. Kept that fight surprisingly competitive, but ended up just kind of being outgunned and losing on power optics. Even going further back than that in his career, you had the fight with Dustin Poirier where he got knocked out, obviously. The dude, Bobby's great if he gets the perfect fight against the perfect guy, but Bobby is, he's very reliant on being able to do his thing, which is kind of box on the outside, make you miss and throw counters. And I think that's a big problem against a guy like Turner with the size difference here. Yeah, to Brick Squad's point, even the Lando fight, the first Lando fight, Lando caused him a fair amount of issues with that. You watch on the outside, Turner's pretty happy to let fighters stay on the outside if they want to, and really rip kicks to the body, rip kicks to the legs, and I don't see what Bobby is going to do if he's on the outside to, change that dynamic terribly much. Now, could he do what Dan Hooker did? Maybe. I mean, I bet Dan Hooker in that fight. There was probably value in retrospect, but I mean, look at the absolute drubbing Hooker had to go through in that fight to close distance and ultimately, kind of break Turner down the stretch. He took a ton of damage in rounds 1, 2, and the early part of round 3 in that fight. I don't think Bobby can win the fight that Dan Hooker did, because I don't think he can walk through that damage. He could clip Turner for sure. Turner's been knocked out before. He's certainly killable. But I just think it's going to be hard for him to consistently stay in that range where he can actually damage Turner. And Bobby is such a headshot merchant that, him trying to strike to the head with a guy this much taller and this much longer, I just think is inherently problematic. Yeah, short notice and his interviews being concerning, I don't disagree, but I do think, you're dealing with a guy who's on the way up and a guy in Bobby Green who, look, he was in basically a 50-50 fight with Jared Gordon up until, the illegal blow that ended that fight. I love Jared Gordon, but I mean, Jalen Turner would do horrible, horrible things to him. I think Bobby's probably on the decline. I haven't bet the fight yet. I'm watching the lines. It seems like it keeps coming down. But if it gets into like the minus 170 range, I think I would take a small bet on Turner here. It's just the physical and athletic intangibles are just so heavily in the favor of Turner, in my opinion, in addition to the fact that he's far, far younger. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, Pepe said he'd be rise to wrestle Jalen. I actually don't think Bobby could wrestle Jalen, to be honest. I think that would go. I mean, maybe he could gas him out if he tried, but I'd be pretty surprised if he had any extended grappling success. But we'll see what happens. I think Turner's going to win this fight. I kind of think people are putting a lot of stock in Bobby because of how fun Bobby is, because he's kind of finally started to have a moment the last year or two. But I think Turner just stylistically is a nightmarish matchup for Bobby. Moving on, we got the main event. We got Arman Tsarukyan taking on Beneil Dariush. The line, Arman minus 300. The comeback on Beneil plus 250. Awesome main event here. I had initially bet Arman at minus 175. I actually arbed out of that ticket earlier this week after this team just kept coming. I do think he's going to win this fight, but I actually, the more I think about it, it is a close fight. Like, I think Arman, he's got such large physical edges in the wrestling and just general athleticism that it's hard to ignore, especially with the fact that Beneil's 5 months removed from a pretty ugly KO, and Arman is 27 and not really taking any damage in his career at this point. I mean, he did get dinged in his last fight, but yeah, I mean, those factors alone, I think, is enough for me to say Arman moderate favorite makes sense. But when you dig in past that, I don't know. Like, I trust all of those things I just said, but I doubt that Arman is going to be able to just easily grapple Beneil. Like, I think he can get takedowns. I think he can wear on Beneil in the clinch early in this fight a bit and kind of sap his gas tank. But I do not think this is going to be a fight where Arman lands a takedown 30 seconds in and then it's like a round and he's controlling him and beating him up on top. Um, and striking, I mean, Beneil's a really good striker. I could see him hurting Arman in this fight. Though at the same time, I could also see, here's the thing, like people keep talking about Arman like not having much power. I'm not sure that's true. I actually think he throws like a decent amount of heat. He's pretty fast. And I trust his durability more than I trust Benny's here. But I think Benny's a slightly better striker. So like while they're fresh, I could see Benny competing or even getting out of the head or even hurting and finishing Arman in this fight. But I do I do think the longer it goes, as Arman starts to kind of get used to the challenge in front of him, because Benny's a tough guy to fight, and Benny starts to get a bit more tired, it should really swing to Arman in the back half here. The wrestling might get a bit easier for him. I don't know how much damage Benny can take over a 5-round fight. You know, the truth is the most recent run for Benny, and I said this prior to the Oliveira fight, but he hasn't really faced, had many challenging fights. Like the Gamrot fight was the most challenging fight, but Gamrot provided no real threat on the feet. The Tony fight was a layup. You know, the only time he's really faced a physical specimen like Arman in this entire run was Drew Dober back in 2019, and Drew Dober actually gave him hell. And yeah, I think Benny has the skills to win this fight. I think he is the better striker, and I think he can counter grapple well enough to keep it standing. But at the same time, I mean, the firepower our mom brings to the table, just in terms of his speed, strength, athletic ability, is just it's at the top of the division. Whereas Benny's is, the biggest flaw I think in Benny's career is that he's like an A+ level fighter with very, very meh physicality and athletic skills. So yeah, like Pepe said, this is kind of where I am. I feel like the Benny cardio narrative is a bit overrated because the dude has actually shockingly done pretty well in round threes. At the same time, though, he does look visibly gassed in them. And I think it's one thing to be getting takedowns while you're tired against Diego Ferreira in a round three. It's another thing to have, a silverback like Arman Tsarukyan, still coming at you deep into a fight when you're feeling like that. I kind of think Arman probably takes over the back half of this fight. I think he's got a lot more finishing upside. I know we saw Arman hurt in his last fight, and Benny's dangerous enough to hurt him. But I think there's a big durability edge for Arman here. Based on his scrambling ability, I don't think a sub is very, very likely for Benny. So I'd give Arman a decent edge in finishing upside, a decent edge in cardio, a decent edge in physicality. Honestly, even in terms of quality competition, Arman's got, a decent edge there as well over the course of his career. So yeah, I lean Arman. I think the line's wide though. I would say Arman somewhere in the -200 to -250. Arman in the -200 to -250 range, I think makes a fair amount of sense here. Just based on the certainties around Arman and the uncertainties around Benny at his age off the KO with potentially spotty cardio. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to get involved. First of all, I love Benny, but second of all, you don't lay -300 against guys that are as skilled as Beneil Dariush. That just doesn't. I shouldn't say it doesn't ever end well. It rarely ends well though. So yeah, I mean, I think Arman's going to win. He's the pick. Honestly, if anything, I kind of do think the under is a decent look here. Uh, Benny's going to go for it, and I do think Arman's body kicks could cause potentially real issues for Benny, especially if he starts to slow down here. So yeah, I lean under. I might take a piece of it. I think it's +100 for the under 3.5 right now. But otherwise, yeah, I think Arman wins. Not a whole lot else to say. It's an amazing main event. I'm excited to see how it plays out. It's one of the more fun main events we've had in some time. But yeah, I mean, guys, that's going to do it for me tonight. I appreciate all of you coming in. Sorry we didn't have it at our normal time. We should be back on schedule next week, 7 p.m. Eastern on Wednesdays. Thanks for coming out tonight, guys. Please, if you like the show, drop a like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. It would help us out a lot. Almost to 1,000 followers. Really want to get across that. But yeah, thanks again, guys. Good luck on your bets this weekend. We'll see you next week. Peace.